Good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday. We have another similar show to yesterday. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We're going to bring you all the latest of what broke overnight in that war between Israel and Hamas. A lot going on there, a lot of developments on our side here as well. So we'll bring you all of that. Also, an update on just how wild some of the misinformation has been. I mean, you always have problems of things that are floating around, videos that are floating around that are fake. I don't think I've ever seen it as widespread as it has been in this particular conflict. So we'll give you some really extraordinary examples there. There's also a lot going on here too, though. We've got updates in terms of that Republican House Speaker fight. The update is sort of that there isn't really an update. There seems to be a complete stalemate. Kevin McCarthy throwing his hat back in the ring, and as of now, he may have more support than anybody. So very hard to say how that is all going to shake out. We also have RFK Jr. making it official yesterday. He is leaving the Democratic primary, running as an independent. Trump people coming at him, guns blazing, knives out.
Very fun.
Very different tone towards him than they were taking just a few weeks ago, so we'll bring you that. Governor Newsom in California making some very interesting vetoes on psychedelics, on condoms, on insulin. Got some details for you there. We also, this just broke yesterday, apparently the current president was just interviewed in connection with the investigation into him having classified documents at his house. So we're just learning about that. And we've got a look at an interesting divide that has opened up over on MSNBC over Israel and Palestine, quite heated over there. So we'll bring you some of that as well. But we wanted to start with the latest on the ground unfolding in Israel and in Palestine.
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of the latest developments, we can begin starting to play some of this. We've compiled some footage of what happened in the last 24 hours. We're beginning here with Israeli strikes on Gaza in the Gaza Strip. Israel saying they've struck nearly 1,000 targets. Some of this footage actually released, this one specifically, by the IDF themselves, which shows multiple targets being struck there across the area. This also comes as a heated battle continues inside of Israel. They still have not 100% taken charge of their border with the Gaza Strip. It's been, more than 48 hours now since the attack. It's the fourth day that this has all been going on so far, and it's still a horrific failure. What we're watching in front of us right now is Gaza civilians reacting to a strike. Here we now have, similar footage of Clarissa Ward from CNN, who had to take shelter in the middle of a rocket attack that was incoming. And then this is some really just heartbreaking footage of that Israeli music festival, which bore the brunt of the terrorist attack, in which multiple people were also taken hostage. So you can see all those cars abandoned, flashing back then to what presumably is a religious site inside of Gaza. And I think what this footage really displays is something we tried to highlight yesterday, which, this is as close you're probably going to get for most people to be able to see it with your own eyes, just how densely populated the area is. The third most densely populated area in the world. It's almost, I actually saw it akin to where we live right here, Krystal, in the DMV, but with 3 to 4 times the population. That's what it would appear to be like, if you were to make it analogous. And all of that also comes on the heels of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making an address in Hebrew and in English about his anticipated response. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it. Once the Jewish people were stateless. Once the Jewish people were defenseless. No longer. Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come. The savage attacks that Hamas perpetrated against innocent Israelis are mind-boggling, slaughtering families in their homes, massacring hundreds of young people at an outdoor festival, kidnapping scores of women, children, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. Hamas terrorists bound, burned, and executed children. They are savages. Hamas is ISIS. And just as the forces of civilizations united to defeat ISIS, the forces of civilization must support Israel in defeating Hamas.
It's Prime Minister Netanyahu making that statement shortly after a development on the Hamas side. What we're about to show you is a translation that was made on Al Jazeera by Hamas, in which they stated that for every airstrike, they would execute one of the hostages live and on camera. Let's take a listen to what they said.
Over the past few hours, we suffered as a result of the harm inflicted on our brothers and sisters at the hands of the fascist, barbarian, Zionist attacks targeting residential buildings. Therefore, we decided to put an end to this. From this moment on, we announce that any targeting of innocent civilians without warning will be met, regretfully to say, by executing one of the hostages in our custody. And we will be forced to broadcast this execution. We regret this decision, but we hold the Zionist enemy and their leadership the responsibility for this.
Horrific threat there, and it also comes on the heels of a major report yesterday from Washington. Let's put this up there. In a private phone call, actually, between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden, he said, quote, "We have to go into Gaza." He said the President Biden, Israel does not have any choice but to unleash a ground operation in Gaza. Quote, "Directly, we have to go in," the Israelis said, according to 3 Israeli and U.S. sources that were briefed on the call. This is by a reporter here in Washington who is also Israeli. What his message signals, obviously, is that the country's response is going to look like in the days and the weeks to come will be, quote, "a long and difficult war." This also comes overnight, Krystal, as Israel actually mobilized another 60,000 active reservists and now has a total of 360,000 actually who have been called up. That basically touches the entire country of Israel. You know, almost anybody at this point would know somebody who has been called up for the situation. There's also been some developments in terms of Lebanon. There have been some Israeli strikes that have been observed over the Lebanese border, presumably on Hezbollah targets. We haven't seen yet any major escalation yet from Hezbollah or official declaration of war. That would, of course, touch on what we talked about yesterday, the two-front nightmare scenario for Israeli war planners. But clearly, we're still in the 4th day, and we're almost in a holding pattern. And it's a terrible holding pattern because we know whatever is to be unleashed, it is going to be absolute hell for a lot of people. What really we are presumably seeing is that Israel believes that it needs to get total control of all of its border before any ground operation can be launched inside of Gaza. That hopefully, at least there have been some limited diplomatic communications. The Qatari government, which does have an official relationship with Hamas, has been in active talks in order to try and release some of the hostages, or at least some of the American hostages. They're the main go-between right now with the West. But that's really where the military situation stands right now. You know, like we've had strikes, we have border clearings and all of that, and then of course we now have Hamas saying we'll execute people live on camera. So the stakes really couldn't be higher than they are right now.
Yeah, we're also continue to learn more horrific details about that Hamas attack on Israeli citizens. Ugh. There were 108 bodies found at a single kibbutz, including peace activists. So it just shows you, I mean, it's horrible. There's just no other way to say it. And my heart breaks for the people who have been affected by this incredible tragedy. And now we see with these roughly 1,000 Israeli strikes inside of Gaza, they have not launched the ground invasion yet. All signs are pointing in that direction with the massing of troops, with that Axios report that Saagar was pointing to saying, listen, we've got to go in. And so at the same time as you have obviously horror and outrage at the war crimes committed by Hamas, including now the use of civilians as hostage pawns in all of this, you also see growing concern from the international community about war crimes from the Israeli side, including their announcement that they're going to have a complete siege, which announced effectively to collective punishment of all 2.2 million people within Gaza. Remember, as Saagar was saying, Gaza is densely populated, and remember, all of the people there are not Hamas. Half of the population are children. The median age in the Gaza Strip is 19 years old. You have many people who are living in poverty. Already, the water is barely drinkable. There are efforts in place right now to try to establish some sort of humanitarian corridor so that people, the many thousands of people who have already been injured in Israeli strikes, can seek effective medical care, because even before this now complete siege situation where they're denying food, water, electricity, fuel, etc., already they really suffered and struggled to have sufficient medical supplies in the Gaza Strip. That, of course, now only exacerbated, and with the death toll rising into over 500, including children, including journalists, this has become an urgent need. Let me just read you a little bit of what the UN human rights chief said about all of this in terms of the full siege. They said on October 9th, the Israeli authorities ordered a full siege of Gaza, shutting off electricity, water, food, and fuel supplies. This risks seriously compounding the already dire human rights and humanitarian situation in Gaza, including the capacity of medical facilities to operate, especially in light of increasing numbers of injured. The imposition of sieges that endanger the lives of civilians by depriving them of goods essential for their survival is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Any restrictions on the movement of people and goods to implement a siege must be justified by military necessity or may otherwise amount to collective punishment. So it's a horrific situation, and war crimes already being committed by both sides, beginning with Hamas with the horror that they inflicted on Israeli citizens.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the nightmares right now is that there has not been any real development from the Egyptian side. I often feel like the Egyptians don't really get much of the criticism that they deserve here as well. They're participating in the blockade on Gaza, and the truth is that they don't want the Palestinians
They
to
don't
come
want the
into.
refugees.
Yeah, they don't want to deal with what the Jordanians have had to deal. None of the Saudis, none of the Qataris. Multiple people contacted me yesterday. They're like, "Hey, why don't they just take them?" I'm like, "Well, they hate them too. Unfortunately, that's the truth." If we were to establish a humanitarian corridor out of Gaza with the territory that they have with Egypt, there would be a credible case there. You could basically do what the U.S. military did, in I think it was the first or the second battle of Fallujah, where they're like, look, everybody who doesn't want to fight, you should leave. And anybody who stays, you're going to be considered an active combatant. Because at the very least, in that scenario, you give people a chance to go. Otherwise, it is impossible. I'm not even going to say virtually impossible. It is impossible then to conduct military operations inside of Gaza, both from an airstrike level and at a ground level, without massive collateral damage. And, that is one of those where I keep actually thinking about what Trita Parsi said on our show yesterday, which was very, very prescient. He said, remember, after 9/11, the world was with America. Our response to 9/11 and eventually came to bite us such that we eventually created more international terrorism. Our response ended up killing, untold numbers of more people than were even affected in the overall attack. And on net, we came out far worse from our response than we did for the attack. A lot of the world right now is with Israel. A lot of the world is horrified by the attacks. Even with the airstrikes and all of that, their death toll in Israel appears. We don't know yet. From the official sources, at least 900 or so Israelis were killed in the operation. And there's, I think, about 700 or 800 that have been killed on the Palestinian side. Many of those actually are civilians. We'll never really know what the actual breakdown is. But I think he is absolutely correct to flag for them. He's like, look, you kill 10,000, you kill 100,000, that's not actually all that crazy when you think about how densely populated it is if these people have nowhere to go. And that's why I think anybody who has and I understand there's a lot of bloodthirst, and very obviously from a lot of sides, but there's not everybody inside of these cities. It's just like Fallujah. Not everybody inside of Fallujah was a terrorist. A lot of these people were very well-meaning Iraqis. They wanted nothing to do with this nonsense. And they saw their homes razed to the ground. Same thing in Mosul. ISIS took over Mosul. Does that mean everybody in Mosul was, a terrorist? No, they were the ones who actually suffered the most. They hated them. And so I think it's just a very, very unfortunate situation. And I don't think I see a way around it, though, because Hamas is in some cases also, they have a military necessity to try to keep as many civilians as possible. They're telling many of those people, no, don't leave. Like, that's Israeli propaganda. In some cases, they might even prevent them from leaving because they want to be able to use them as human shields. And these people are pawns. They're completely caught in the middle. So I don't know.
And they also have nowhere to go.
Yeah, Well, exactly.
I
Right
mean,
now, they have nowhere to go.
Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu made this statement of like, leave now.
Right.
They can't. They literally can't. I mean, there's been a blockade on Gaza for 16 years now before this complete siege situation with their high-tech fencing and all of this. That was another piece that came out, which is really wild to contemplate and kind of terrifying. You know, Israel spent millions and millions of dollars building this high-tech fence with all sorts of surveillance apparatus around Gaza. They thought that was sufficient. And because of the extremists who are in Netanyahu's governing coalition, they redirected many IDF soldiers to the West Bank to help protect the Jewish settlers there and the illegal settlements in and around the West Bank. And so there was very little troop presence there. And then all of their multi-million-dollar, super high-tech equipment was basically disabled by like $100 off-the-shelf drones. That Hamas was, and that was their first thing that they did before the rockets, before the invasion. They disabled all of this high-tech surveillance equipment, again, using this just like, you know, $100 drones up against this multi-million-dollar fence. And so it shows you, I mean, on the one hand, it's unbelievable. If you think of I feel uncomfortable even using the word war because on the one hand, you have this, you know, effectively non-state actor. On the other hand, you have one of the most well-funded, powerful militaries in the entire world. Like there's no doubt the asymmetry of the situation. And on the other hand, because of technology, you see how, and this is something Trita Parsi talked about yesterday too, there is a bit of leveling of the playing field in terms of the carnage that these sides are able to afflict on each other.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting lesson. A lot of people are saying that Hamas is learning from ways that the Ukrainians are actually fighting against Russia. But that's really one where the U.S. military also found that out in Iraq and in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
we had
that's true.
billions and billions of dollars, and then all it took was Iranians to give this one specific IED technology which could penetrate our Humvees, and 500 Americans were killed, thousands were mutilated, and then it took us billions and billions and billions of dollars to build like this one thing which would technically not, you know, would not inflict the same amount of damage. There's the asymmetry and the part of the quote unquote untechnologically advanced has probably never been at a better position because they just have so many vectors. I mean, even with the music festival, who could have predicted they're literally going to, is it paraglide or hand glide, you know, into the facility? And how do you protect against that? Other than having like literal physical troops on the ground, you can't technology your way out of this. And that's something though that Israel has really pioneered over time. And just to underscore how Israeli society is preparing for the next couple of days. Here was a report from Israel where they're telling citizens, you need to shelter in place and have enough supplies to ride out the next 72 hours because we don't know what's going to happen. Here's what he said.
I think what the IDF Home Front decided to do is use this opportunity to remind all Israelis that according to their regular guidelines, we should all be prepared with, all Israelis should be prepared with and stock up in their shelters. I think that was the intention, and that also explains, I think, perhaps the clarification that they issued following that. But already, Israelis didn't wait for the clarification, and many of them have taken to the supermarkets at this late hour of the day, only simply because of that scary statement.
So there we're actually trying to clean it up, saying, look, it's not imminent, but you just need to make sure that you have it. It does come, though, at a time when rockets continue to rain down, you know, on Israel. Even literally right as we speak, there's a rocket attack going on with Tel Aviv. Iron Dome is being tested probably to its absolute limit.
Yeah.
And it does show you, you know, it's like people inside of Israel, I think, not only does everybody there, it's a country of only 10 million people. If you think about just Israeli citizens, if 360,000 people are called up, everybody has a son, a brother, an uncle, or somebody who is involved in the military operation in somehow, or at the very least has been called, you know, to their post. But they also, you know, are very much feeling as if they are at risk, especially with all of the violence that's happening, continuing in the South. And I just think it's still so, you know, obviously we're going to continue to develop the war, but I don't know how Israel will never be the same after this, just because so much of their adherence to the security state, their trust in the system, the unbelievable amount of power that they give to the government and all that was, you're going to keep us safe, you're going to make sure this stuff never happens again. But It's a massive failure. I mean, massive. We saw the border fail. We saw that they, how I said this yesterday, Snowden made this point. Netanyahu invests all this money in Pegasus 1 and in Pegasus 2. They say they can tap every phone in Gaza. They say they've got intel agents all over the ground. There's even a joke that the Israeli people always make about like, oh, 1 in 10 Hamas guys is an Israeli informant. It's like, well, what happened? And then same with Iran. They have all of these vaunted, secure, oh, we snuck a Mossad guy into their nuclear reactor and we blew it up from the inside and all of this. Well, if Iran maintains all these ties, how did you miss it?
Right.
Same with Lebanon. So look, we're never going to get over that one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big, big question that remains.
There continue to be a lot of questions about that Wall Street Journal report too that we covered with Dr. Parsi yesterday, alleging per Hamas and Hezbollah that Iran was directly involved. Now, do we know that Iran backs Hamas and helps supply? Absolutely. Like, there's no question about that. But were they directly involved in the planning of these attacks? That's the question. And there's been a lot of cold water poured on that report from the Wall Street Journal, both from the U.S. side and from the Israeli side, which is really interesting. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.